was so many people rushing in, and they're climbing over the railings around the embankment edge of the field.
Seeing all those people lying on the pitch, not knowing they were dead, assuming they're all fainted, we didn't think it was anything unusual at the time. It wasn't until afterwards that we read in the press and heard on the radio really what had happened.
Of course, they all poured in and, of course, pushed the people further along, and then, of course, the crash barriers couldn't take the weight of them.
You could see when you look back, you could see some of them being carried, lifted, bodies being carried above their heads.
A knock comes to the door, and it's police. There'd been a bad accident. Some had been killed, and police took her away to the mortuary to identify the body.
Well, I was 11 years old at the time. My friend was going down to the match with his uncle. Unfortunately, I'd been told by my father at the time not to go because there'd be too many people there. However, because my friend was going with his uncle, I felt it was okay for me to go and tag on.
The big, it was Stanley Matthews, the big attraction.
Sixth round of the FA Cup, second leg. We'd obviously won the first leg away from home, so we already won foot in the semi-final, if you will.
Nothing unusual at that point. We went into our usual spot in front of the old half-time scoreboard, which was at the back of the ground next to the signal box on the railway, and we stood in front of that because that was right behind the goal. You got the best view of the game there.
A lot tried to get in the embankment. It became overloaded, so they stopped admitting people coming in. And a guy with his son decided they'd had enough, they couldn't stand it anymore, so they decided they were going to get out, and they opened the gate to get out, leaving that gate open, and more people came in.
And then all at once, the crowd just seemed to be coming closer and closer and down.
That was when, of course, sort of things began to happen. We didn't know what was happening. We saw people being handled, pushed over the tops of the heads of the crowd, which they did in those days if anybody fainted, over the wooden fence behind the goal, up onto the grass, and they placed them on the grass. So there were lots of bodies lying on the grass. We just thought they'd fainted in the crowd.
And the referee stopped the game. I think we'd only been playing like 10 minutes, something like that. Nobody knew then, I don't think, that anybody had been killed. You know, I didn't really realise how bad it was.
My grandmother is from Great Lever, and at the time was working, she worked at Swan Lane Mill, but on Saturdays worked at a shop on Manchester Road. And she said that often a tram driver, who was quite friendly, would stop outside the shop and say, "How are things?" and what have you. On that day, she said, as the tram pulled up, she knew something was wrong straight away. And she said he was white as a ghost, and shouted down, "Lily, do you know anybody who's at the football match today?" And she said, "Well, yeah, of course I do." You know, he said something terrible's happened.
Going back to my father, of course, it was based at Bolton Fire Station. My mother had gone down to give him some tea in the afternoon, which she tended to do when he was on the weekend duties. So, of course, when she got to the fire station and said the time gone, he went berserk apparently, and proceeded to go and get a fire engine and drive his fire engine down to Burnden Park and parked on the front of the car park, and then proceeded to go under the stands and then looked under every blanket of the 33 people that were killed to find out if I was one of the faces that were there, which must have been horrendous when one thinks about it now.
She says that she took off her apron, threw it on the side, and set off running down Manchester Road towards the football ground. And as she approached, she used to say she was expecting to see thousands of people all rushing from the ground, but actually the game was still going on.
I just remember they played the game, which was, I suppose, remarkable, but as I recall anyway, the press, the Bolton paper afterwards, it said the police thought it advisable to play the game rather than have a lot of disgruntled fans going home after a disaster like that. So I can understand that reasoning.
One of the worst parts about it and not actually being in that crowd, that part of the crowd, was the bars, all these barriers twisted and pulled out, and you thought, how the heck? Because when you were against them bars, somebody come out the barriers, somebody come and pressing down on you, pressing down. No wonder they died.
When we got to the Godwin Street, all the women in this terraced street were all at the doors waiting for the husbands or the sons or whoever to come home from the match, because they knew what had happened and we didn't. When we arrived at the house of my friend's uncle, his wife threw her arms around him and she was so relieved, of course, that he was still alive.
And then when it was time for coming home, match finished, they got on the coach, but no Uncle Jim and my dad. Where are they? Well, all I know is my dad fought all through the war, my Uncle Jim. He fought in 1945. He comes out of the army, and 2 months later, him and my Uncle Jim couldn't get killed in a football match.
So it's a different world that we live in. And I think it must have been frightening to think the way it was back then, notwithstanding the fact that it was just at the end of the war. And I think a lot of people are probably, immune's the wrong word, but I'm sure you understand where I'm coming from. Death was something that had happened in a lot of families, to a lot of people.
And this is where my mother tells it. A knock comes to the door, and it's police. There's been a bad accident. Some have been killed. And police took her away to the mortuary to identify the body. My brother was 4, and I weren't even born. And were brought up on a single parent. I saw a picture, a photograph, and it showed one of the first photographs after the accident, bodies. And this lady could identify her dad. And somebody else identified by a young 19-year-old wearing clogs.
You look at the people that did lose their lives, where they came from. They weren't all from Bolton, but from all the northwest. And I think you go back, and this is what I got from my grandfather. He actually lived in Salford, so they used to travel all over the northwest watching football, because that was the entertainment. So the biggest game in the northwest they'd always try and go to. The biggest game that day was Bolton Wanderers against Stoke.
It makes you wonder, like these days, nothing like that had happened, because as soon as something like that happened, the match would be stopped.
Yeah.
But they played on, like they went off like 10 minutes, I think it's a quarter minute, something like that, for them to get these people from, because they were going on to the touchline, they were touching the touch, so they had to move them all back.
After the Second World War, perhaps people thought, the horror of that event was over now, and we've got some things to look forward to in life. And maybe going to a football match and spending time with your friends and family and going having a social event like that is something that we fought the war years for. And now, a year after the war is finished, something like this happens, and I think it was like a double smack round the face, because the war's finished, we can move on now, but then something so horrific happens, and something that had such a huge effect on all the people who attended the game.
I mean, it's terrible when you think about it nowadays, but at the time, of course, you were not aware of it, and you were there.
But something you'll never, well, I don't think I'll ever forget anything like, Because to see people being lifted over their heads onto the hook and put them on the side.
The area where the accident happened, I mean, the depth of the terrace was massive. So all that was sorted, it made it safer, the barriers were made stronger. And obviously the turnstiles themselves, they started putting numbers on, so you could actually, when you went in, the turnstile operator could see how many people were actually going into that area. So at least you knew, once it had reached its limit, right, that's it, you can't, no more can go in.
It was, well, it's like I said, it's an experience you'll never forget. Something. I wish it had been more pleasant, but that's the way it went. Yeah.